Sir, I'm going to have the judges introduce themselves. Welcome to everyone who's come to watch Joe's presentation. Joe's going to present to us for a few minutes, and then it's going to be open for the judges to ask questions. A reminder that the audience doesn't have an opportunity to ask questions. You can talk with them about it later, but the judges, it'll be open for the judges to ask questions when you finish. Okay? Very good. You ready? Great.
Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. This is a quote by Tim Knopke, who, ironically, was completely useless to society. But he still had a good quote, and he's saying that you can really accomplish anything you want to through hard work, even if you don't really know what you're doing. Excuse that. Even if you don't know what you're doing when you're doing it, you can learn along the way with a bunch of hard work. And that's really what I did for my second project. My project was called a prayer bench. And the point of this project was to display these prayer rocks in a fun and creative way. And most people don't know what a prayer rock is when I tell them. This is a prayer rock. Each of these are rocks with prayers written on them from the children at St. Bartholomew Catholic School. And I had about 100 of these to work with for my project. And I had to, using wood and glass top, I had to create something that people could both sit on and look into and see these prayers that the kids were written. And what I have now are some examples of prayers that were written on these rocks. Here are some of the more serious meaning words. Soldiers in Iraq, broken hearts that aren't hurt, mentally and physically ill, keeping old friends and making new ones, and all who have cancer. And now here's some examples of ones that gave me a little laugh when I read them. They just kind of gave me a little smile. Thank you, God, for old people. They make me happy. All those who aren't cool like God. Give us the wisdom to pass the math test tomorrow. And one of my personal favorites, my foot hurts. Each of these rocks, no matter whether they're serious or not, came from the heart, straight from the heart of the kid that wrote them. And my task was to display these in a fun, creative way. So my mentor and I decided that a bench would be the best way to do this. The process of making the bench was certainly no easy one. It was one that took an immense amount of planning, and it really just took a toll on my senior year. The whole time management it took to be able to take all this time and do these things. So the planning that I had to do, the first thing I had to do was to build a good relationship with the local hardware stores. Overall, I spent probably about 10 hours altogether in these stores, and even though that may seem like a really large amount of time to be shopping, you have to be able to find the best deal. You have to be able to find the right product that will suit your project, and that was one of the things that I learned to do throughout this whole process. After all the planning that I had done, I decided that the first step in my creative adventure would be to make a prototype. This would be a small-scale version of what my project would be, so then I would be able to just basically blow it up, do the same thing but slightly larger. And so the first thing I did, I had to get rocks that were similar to the prayer rocks of the bench. So I went to Menards and got a bag of them, but then I realized that all of them are really muddy and nasty. They wouldn't be usable in the project. So I spent my New Year's Day hand washing and hand drying each of these rocks. The next thing I had to do, now that the rocks were clean, was to cut the wood. I used this board of wood and this chop saw to cut out 4 pieces of wood that would be the appropriate lengths and sizes for my prototype. And so I used a simple drill and screws to put it all together after I cut it out. And it was really just a pretty simple process. Once I had done that, I could cut the plywood, which would be used for the bottom of the prototype where the rocks would sit. So once I'd done that, I drilled it to the bottom, and I began placing the rocks in, and everything was looking fine. This, and also this, is my finished prototype. Now, you can come up and see this later, of course, whenever you're done. But there were, after I had finished it, there was 3 words that my sister said that really summed up what I thought about that looks awful. And normally I wouldn't have been so happy to hear her say that, but the thing was, she was right. That's terrible. That won't be good enough for a senior project. So that's what prompted me to my next step. Step 2, find someone who knows what they're doing. Luckily, there's a guy in my neighborhood, Mr. Tom Sassana, who does woodworking as a hobby. And on the weekends, he takes out his tools and he makes tables kind of like what I'm doing, except a little less complicated. So after talking to him, he told me that the first thing to do was to get myself organized, get a lot of planning done, which I had already planned on doing that, but he showed me some specific techniques that were special to it. So my step 3 to make the plans, first thing I would do is draw pictures, of course. That was simple enough, but another thing that he had me do was make a cut list. And this is an example of what my cut list is. It shows all the different components of what I need, what they are exactly, the sizes, the thicknesses, how many of them I need, just things like that to get myself organized, so when the time came to cut the wood, I would know exactly what I'm doing. And once I had done that, I was ready to cut the wood. This is the array of wood that I had to work with. The plywood for the bottom, each piece is for the legs, the different components of the bench. I needed to use each of these. So using tools such as the chop saw and the table saw, I went to Mr. Sassana's house and we spent a couple hours cutting out all the pieces of wood, the appropriate sizes. And once I had done all that, I had to cut biscuit slots. And this is what a biscuit is. It's actually a really interesting thing. When you put wood glue on this, it actually expands within the slot that I would have to cut out later. And whenever I would do this, the glue and the biscuit would hold the 2 pieces of wood together really, really sturdy and firmly. So everything would work out like that. So after I had cut out all the pieces of wood, I used the biscuit cutter to cut out these slots into the pieces of wood. And once I had done that, I was able to put these pieces of wood together, and using wood clamps, I put it together to see how it all fit together, to see if everything worked. This is obviously much better than the prototype, but I still had work to do, of course. And one of the things that it was make it look good. And this is the piece of wood, one of the pieces of wood that I used for the top, where both the person and the glass would be sitting. And so what I needed was a little edge along here that would be comfortable to sit on, and an edge along the other side that would be perfect for the glass to sit in, just a little 90-degree edge that would be simple. So using Mr. Sassana's router table, I spent time just pushing the wood through and cutting up, putting the edge on it that it needed. And one of the things that Mr. Sassana taught me was safety, especially. Safety was a big thing. And notice that I'm using these 2 sticks to push the wood through whenever I am getting close to the router. This was a technique he called using sticks to push the wood through the router. Now that I had done that, I was ready to begin sanding the wood. This was one of my completed pieces, but it was still rough, so it needed sanding. So my step 6 was to sand the wood. Each of the 15 pieces of wood needed sanding with 3 different grains of sandpaper each. You can imagine that would take a while. I underestimated the time a little bit, as you can see in this timeline of my evening. Obviously an evening very well spent. But now that I had all the pieces sanded, they were all pretty smooth, I was ready to begin gluing it together. And that was my next step. My uncle that lives in Indianapolis, luckily, he also does woodworking as a hobby of his. So he said that he'd be glad to teach me how to glue the wood together. So I drove up there and he showed me the steps to gluing all the pieces of wood together. First thing was to glue the biscuit slots, putting glue inside there so that the biscuit would be able to stick. Next, glue the biscuit itself, and then put the biscuit inside and cover it with even more glue. After that, I could put the 2 pieces of wood together and use one of these big long wood clamps to keep it together for 24 hours. And after those 24 hours were up, the glue would be dry and this piece of wood would be unbreakable. And once I had been shown how to do this one piece, I went home and